This is FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls, and this week Jonathan Bennett and I are talking to Stephen J. Vaughan-Nichols, who is one of the best and most inveterate journalists in all of technology, and especially on the open source case. We talk about that and space and much more, and that is coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 629, recorded Wednesday, May 12th, 2021. Stephen J. Vaughan-Nichols. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Audible. Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment. Delve into your next title on Audible with Audible Plus. New members can try Audible Plus for 30 days. Download the Audible app and get started with a free trial at audible.com/floss or text FLOSS to 500-500. And by Technology Powers X. Learn how technology is reshaping business through an original podcast from Dell Technologies. Search for Technology Powers X anywhere you listen to podcasts and download each episode today. Hello again, everybody. I am Doc Searls. This is FLOSS Weekly. Guest host today is Jonathan Bennett. Howdy, Jonathan.
Hey, Doc. It's good to be here.
Another thing is that because I am sure I'm screwed up on who the co-host is going to be this week, you very fortunately just kind of showed up and I came off the bench. We don't really have a bench. Everybody's a player here, but thank you for being here. This is very helpful.
Problem. I've been following Stephen's work for years now, and so when he was going to be the guest, I said I don't want to miss that, and so I wanted to make sure and listen in as an audience member. And then I'm I think I'm the only guy from FLOSS that's real active on the Discord, so I was going to jump on Discord and make sure and copy any questions over for you guys. Mm-hmm. And then Doc said, I may have forgotten to tell the scheduled co-host that he was the scheduled co-host.
Because
okay.
I am not a producer. I am a disorganizer. I am a vortex of discoordination of anything that requires management. And years ago when I ran a company, I was told they had like an intervention. They said, "You're a great leader, but you're a lousy manager." So I'm not the one you want to hand that stuff off to. That's why I was a journalist and still am. I want to. So you're in Oklahoma, I assume. You're still holding down that state?
Yes, I'm still in the corporate headquarters here in Lawton, Oklahoma, and my corporate headquarters office suite behind me is becoming more and more finished. The cabinet that goes up there is out in the garage, letting the clear coat dry on it, and hopefully tonight or tomorrow it'll come back in here and get permanently installed. Cool. So we're working along slowly.
And I like how your giant chair has masked the breakfast you had behind it there that I saw earlier. That's okay. Mine is below sight right here. Okay, so we're going to get moving on this. So I need to let y'all know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Audible. Have you ever wanted to read a memoir and just didn't have the time? Or maybe you found a title you couldn't put down, but you also need to fold the laundry. Now you can do both because Audible makes it possible. When you're driving, cooking, cleaning your house, or just relaxing, you can listen to amazing audio files with Audible. Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment all in one place. At Audible, you can find the largest selection of audiobooks, ranging from bestsellers and new releases to celebrity memoirs, languages, business, motivation, and more. Get original entertainment from top celebrity creators and thousands of popular and binge-worthy podcasts. They are now offering their newest plan, Audible Plus. Audible Plus gives you full access to their popular Plus catalog. Audible Plus is all about giving members a chance to listen to and discover new favorites and explore different formats like exclusive Words Plus music series or a podcast you never considered before, even theatrical performances. You can listen all you want to thousands and thousands of popular audiobooks, original entertainment, and podcasts, including ad-free versions of your favorite shows and exclusive series. They're all available to download or stream, so you can listen anywhere, anytime, on any device, and you never lose your spot. To use your Audible membership, you need to download the Audible app. The Audible app is free and can be installed on all smartphones and tablets. And for my experience with Audible, by the way, I am on 2 audiobooks where I am the voice. so I like that we don't have some substitute if an author wants to be heard. Listening to Audible will make you feel inspired, connected, and it's available in an all-in-one app. Audible Plus is your playlist for life. So what are you waiting for? Delve into your next title on Audible with Audible Plus. New members can try Audible Plus for 30 days. Download the Audible app and get started with a free trial at audible.com/floss or text floss to 500-500. That's Audible, AUDIBLE.com/floss or text floss to 500-500 to start your free trial today. Okay, our guest today is Stephen Vaughan-Nichols, and we've circled around each other. I checked my email, and I think it goes back into the 90s that we've had correspondence with sort of another. Stephen is I think probably the most inveterate journalist on the open source front that we still have, because so many are gone. Stephen, also known as SJVN, because all the alphas get to be just initialisms, has been writing about technology and business of technology since the CPM 80 was the cutting edge PIC operating system. That is, I'm reading from his very long bio. And 300 BPS was a fast internet connection, pretty much the only internet connection. And WordStar was the state-of-the-art word processor, and we liked it. So, Stephen, welcome to the show.
Hi there. Actually, before that 300 BPS, though, there was 110 telex, and I used that as well for data. God help me.
I had wanted to use, going back as far as I can with digital, I don't think Morse code qualifies as that because I was a boy ham, but I wanted to do Mars, and it was that military stuff where you could, I guess it was a kind of data, teletype and things like that. But we're both inveterate. So where are you located in the physical world? Because I'm not even sure.
Yeah, in real life, I live in Asheville, North Carolina, up in the Blue Ridge Mountains.
I love it there. Pronounced back when people had Southern accents still. I went to college in North Carolina, lived 20 years around Chapel Hill. And Asheville there was pronounced Asheville. like Louisville is Louisville, Asheville is Asheville for some reason. Maybe it probably isn't that way anymore. I don't know. All my cousins and stuff who live there kind of half lost their accents a while ago. So what brought you there? Are you from there originally, or are you
no,
just chose?
I'm originally from West by God, Virginia, in the middle of rural nowhere. There was just a survey came out yesterday, actually. We have, back in my home county, we have 1%, count it, 1% broadband penetration.
Wow.
So I left there, and
wow.
But I always really loved the mountains of Appalachia, and I used to live in Washington, D.C., and work out of Manhattan doing the Amtrak commuter thing. And then I thought, so long as FedEx can find me and I have a good internet connection, I can work anywhere. So I had an opportunity to move to Asheville in around 2001. And I thought, I like Asheville. I could be back in the mountains, and I can still do what I do for a living. So here I am 20 years later, very happy to be here.
I love Asheville, and I was there a couple of years ago, and I'd love to go back soon. So I want to get us started kind of just talking about journalism in general. I mean, you're still employed, which to me, for any journalist today, is a miracle on the order of loaves and fish. And one reason is because you're damn good and you're prolific. You've produced an awful lot. So do you have a take on what's happened over the last 20 years while our profession is sort of like the profession overall, or just the tech corner of it?
Well, both. I've been a full-time journalist for about 30, not quite 35 years now. And, being in the business, it's hard to know what to say to a general audience. But, essentially, the lack of advertising killed us when it moved from being paper-bound to being net-bound. It did not help any that a lot of the business people in journalism refused to see this coming. They just kept hanging on to the idea that classified ads would always be there. And, spoiler alert, they're not. It's actually classified ads are, I guess, sort of like Yellow Pages are now, sort of like something like you hear older people talk about them, but does anyone actually really ever look at any of those things? The answer is no. I could jump into the business models of online journalism and the paywalls and all that, but I won't bore the audience with it. Essentially, the financial engine that has kept journalism going for decades has been running out of gas for quite some time now. It's still there, and people are getting some kind of handle on some models that work better than others. But it's a cruel business. If someone were to come up to me and say, I want to be a journalist, I'd say to them, if you really, really love digging in and finding the truth and then telling other people about it, if that's essential to your heart, then do it. But otherwise, find something else to do, because if you're not doing this for love, you're not likely to be doing it for money. As it happens, I actually am still doing, quite well, keeping a roof over my head with journalism. But, I am, with no false modesty, pretty good at what I do. I like to say that I'm faster than anyone better than I am, and I'm better than anyone faster than I am when it comes to writing stories. And that's kind of a sweet spot to be in. I'm also lucky. I'll be there, no doubt about it. It's great that I'm talented and I'm able to do this, and I'm hardworking. I'm a workaholic, which that's also a necessary job skill or problem, depending on how you look at it, for being any kind of journalist. And but luck plays a big role in it too, because there are people just as good as I am, if not better, who have left the business because they couldn't make a living at it. Some of them are now doing public relations. Some of them are now actually working for tech companies. But that's never really been my thing. I can't see myself doing marketing or public relations. I just really have to say what I think is true about a given situation. And so far, I'm lucky enough that I'm still getting paid to do that. So, yay.
I was with Linux Journal for the better part of 26 years, and until 2019, when it went out of business for exactly the reasons you gave, which is, well, partly for the reasons you gave, which is that the advertising business had collapsed. And especially, it wasn't so much the classified part of it. We had brand ads, that mostly it was hardware makers and tool makers of various kinds. And they sponsored the publication. We had, we were pretty thick, at our best, we did really well. But what happened is that the advertising business itself turned into the eyeball chasing business. And if they could find, other places that eyeballs tracked away from a good website showed up, then they advertised over there. And it all became all about every ad had to perform by some metric, rather than a reputation would be accumulated over time, that VA Linux I was thinking of, and Penguin, when Penguin was big computer. Red Hat sponsored us. A lot of other big companies, SUSE and so forth, all the big distributions. And gradually they left us, because they were looking for, they got all the new people coming into the advertising business were all really from the direct marketing world, or at least went along with the direct marketing imperatives. And that's turned into, surveillance capitalism, as Shoshana Zuboff calls it, which is a completely different business. But an interesting thing about journalism now, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are about this, is that everybody could be a journalist. And if some public event happens, there was, and we don't talk politics here, and this isn't really political, but there was, a really major thing that happened about a year ago that caused a giant stir. And there were like 10 people holding their phones up, taking movies of what was going on. And those were used in a trial. And those people were all in their own way journalists. And because everybody's carrying a camera and a recorder and a video thing that frankly looks better than what broadcast did a long time ago. And even now, I mean, the sharpest you get is 1080i on cable, and you're holding up a 4K camera that looks even better and can go on YouTube. So I'm wondering, but I'm thinking there should be some new ecosystem that emerges out of this. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about that and your role, and for that matter, my role, or any veteran's role in that.
Well, certainly, there has been a real push towards, starting with the business side first, there's been a real push towards clickbait journalism. It's all about eyeballs. It's all about your page rank on Google. If you're not on the first page of Google, who cares what you are? So that's a real problem, because it really does become a fight to just get eyeballs, to turn you into the product, really. There's a reason why, while journalism is getting destroyed, Google and Facebook, which control a big chunk of the advertising revenue stream, they're doing just fine, because it doesn't matter where the content comes from so long as it gets eyeballs. And this is both it's a sort of a good news, bad news situation. The good news is that thanks to our cameras on our phones, Samsung Galaxy S10a, and there I go. Samsung will now appreciate this because I mentioned them. News that would otherwise be completely ignored is now, you cannot not see it. A lot of people, thinking of the episode that we're speaking of and not wanting to get into politics, some people don't want it seen, and they never did, which is why I think the kind of things now that we see on video that causes outrage, justifiably causes outrage because it's horrific. This kind of stuff used to happen, but it was always just no one saw it, no one heard it. And now that has changed. And I think that is a change for the better. At the same time, though, it hasn't happened in this case, but it's very easy. It's much easier than people think to manipulate video and so on, to give a false narrative or to wrap a false narrative around a kernel of truth. And that's a problem that we're going to have to be dealing with in the future, because so much of what is trying to affect journalism now essentially is spin. You take whatever the message is, or even an example where it's very clear what's going on is something that's very wrong, and people will still nevertheless try to spin it so that you don't believe what you're literally seeing. And sometimes it's a good thing, again, because again, you can use video to lie. Now, as for the kind of things though that you and I do in the normal course of the day, our world is a very different world. I've done video interviews occasionally with Linus Torvald and a few other people, and there is an audience for that. And you could certainly go up. Well, you wouldn't. Chances are Linus wouldn't like it much if you were just to go up and start talking with him and doing a sort of a selfie interview with him. That would not go well. But certainly those sort of things, people are always interested in what the stars of of technology are doing. Elon Musk actually is a fine example of that. He plays the social media game really well. He's always doing little videos. And it's not just people watching SpaceX launches and going, that is so cool, because, oh, by the way, it really is so cool what they're doing. But also, he just does his own little mini interviews and so on. And so you can do that sort of thing, but there's still a role, I think, for people like us to explain what does it all really mean, what's going on here. I do a lot of fairly technical stuff, not as technical as Linux Weekly News does. If you really want to know hardcore what's going on in Linux, you want to subscribe to Linux Weekly News. They're the people for that. But for people who aren't like that deep into the Linux kernel and so on, one of my jobs, one of my roles is to explain that in a way where people who are technically adept but aren't kernel experts can figure out what's going on. Or the same thing with Kubernetes, which is extremely complicated. Actually, that's always has been my job. I take deeply technical stuff and then I explain it in English to an audience that isn't as technical, or occasionally I do stories where I'm talking to a popular audience who have no clue what the kernel is. And actually, the story I always like to tell about this point is I actually discovered what my career path was going to be in about 5 minutes. And in that 5 minutes, I was working at the time at Goddard Space Flight Center at the library there. And we were having problems with our circulation system. And the programmers were over there to explain it, why they weren't able to fix the problem, to the head librarian. And they brought along all these printouts of the code. And I was looking over their shoulders. And I said, well, look, you say that you can't, it's like it can't write the data. And I said, if you go into this code, you have this do while loop, but earlier you had dropped the DASD. This is an IBM mainframe system. So they had the mainframe hard disk, the direct access storage device was no longer online. And so when it does this, it tries to write there, but it's no longer online, so you can't write to it. And they looked at me, and I looked at them, and we looked at the code, and as it happens, I was right. And the chief librarian looked at me and said, what are you talking about? I mean, what is this? I said, well, it's like you have a file cabinet, and you want to drop a file in it, but you've closed the file cabinet drawer, so when you drop it, instead of it falling in place where it belongs, it hits the floor. And in that 5 minutes, I realized that I can't claim no credit for it. I'm just one of those people who I have the tech gift, as it were. I'm able to look at code. I'm able to look at technology and very quickly and easily figure out what's going on. And in that same 5 minutes, I realized I could take that information and turn it into something that the head librarian could understand, because he just looked at the programmers and said, well, why didn't you tell me that? That makes perfect sense. So that's actually, and here I am about 40 years later, and that's still my job, and there's still a role for it.
Hey, Stephen, Jonathan Bennett here. Want to jump in before Doc gets the next question in. You mentioned in the previous answer things that you would tell to a young aspiring journalist. I think I am a young aspiring journalist in some ways. But what I've found in my fledgling career is, two things. First off, I've built a career simply by whenever somebody says, hey, we've got this thing going on, I tend to say, I think I could do that. Let me try. And I've had great success from that. And secondly, for me, the entire journalism explainer thing, I do some work here on TWiT, and I do work over at hackaday.com. It's a side hustle. It's not really my main source of income. And I'm curious if you see that as the future for people, whether it be, writing blog posts at a site like Hackaday, or even YouTube videos and making a little bit of money on the side from the ad revenue. Is that the future for journalism, for people getting into it?
I think it can be if you've got the talent and the time, because it's very difficult to do 2 or 3 jobs at once. I mean, for a few years when I was first starting out, I was sort of a jack of all trades. I did sysadmin work, I did network admin, and I also did a lot of programming on everything from PCs to mainframes, and I wrote, and I had no life. So it's doable, but finding the time and the energy to do it can be a challenge. That said, though, a lot of people write as a way to help promote their own projects. I'm blanking on any good names right now, but there are people who they write pretty well, and it's not just, puffing up their own stuff, but primarily it is, when you get right down to it, is they're doing it to promote their brand, to promote their open source project, and so on. If you take it too far, of course, if that's what you're doing, you're just advertising, and readers tend to realize that when you're always saying great things about your product and you're always saying negative things, or not even mentioning products or programs that should be mentioned, then you're not really being that honest, and you're not being that trustworthy. And it is possible to get into YouTube or writing and generate your own brand and build enough of a brand if you're smart about the business side, which not a lot of journalists are. Just like actually a lot of programmers and open source people are not great at the business side of things. Yeah. That's why you have the constant story of the programmer in Nebraska who's keeping this a very valuable, essential thing online going, but it's only like that one poor guy working on the code, and God help us if he ever decides to walk away from it all. But yeah, you can certainly build your own brand. Curiously enough, actually, I recently sold my house, which I'm currently in this temporary spare bedroom as I build out my new office. But I sold it to a guy who actually, he has a blog, and he's a video blog rather, about very much consumer tech. And he's got a subscription rate of around 100,000 viewers on a daily basis. And he's doing quite well at it. So it's not that it can't be done in today's journalism. It's just that it's a lot of hard work. But of course, now that I think about it, it's always been a lot of hard work in journalism.
Yeah, it's interesting to me to watch. I mean, obviously, you've got some big names. Like, one of the ones that immediately comes to mind when we talk about this kind of video journalism on YouTube is Linus Tech Tips. They're kind of the 800-pound gorilla in the room there.
Yeah, they're doing really well.
They are, and they're actually making surprisingly useful content these days. Not trying to throw shade on them, but back in the old days, it was a little hokey. But now they're actually doing some interesting things. But the other one that really comes to mind is the guys like, and you mentioned SpaceX is what brings it to mind, like NASA spaceflight. And there's another couple of channels that their main thing is they've got cameras pointing at Boca Chica, Texas all the time. And whenever there's a launch or something moving, they will go live. And they have sometimes hundreds of thousands of people that will tune in and watch it. And it's so interesting because I think it's in some ways, it's a sea change in journalism. Before you've got these big organizations, ZDNet, or even, the Washington Post, USA Today, all of these, they're huge and they try to cover everything. And now that you've got YouTube and even Twitter and you know, all of the different technologies that allow this, you're starting to see, hey, we're journalists, but this is the one thing that we're going to cover. And I find that so interesting.
It is very interesting, and I'm really happy for them that they're able to do that. You know, I mentioned I worked at NASA. When I was growing up as a kid, I was a space nut. And subscribe to these little NASA newsletter things. Shoot, I'm blanking on the name of them now. But they were the equivalent of what you were just talking about now. They were just all space all the time, which is exactly what I wanted. And today, what a lot of people want. Now, the only problem, though, with those as business models is, you know, once upon a time, and it wasn't that long ago, really, there were all these magazines dedicated to nothing but PCs. There was PC World, there was PC Magazine, and so on, PC Tech Journal. And you don't see, I mean, they still exist as online only things, or Computer Shopper, you know, the 1,000 page gorilla of the newsstand back in the day. And, but when the technology becomes commonplace, then it's no longer as interesting. So right now, they're doing really well covering space. And, but somewhere in a few years when it becomes commonplace, where we literally have Starship going up 3 times a day, which is, as I understand it, the goal is to get it up to not just, you know, be taking up huge loads on a not just daily, but several times a day basis. And that may sound like, oh, how could they do that? But then it wasn't that long ago when we thought, gosh, Federal Express delivering stuff around the world, for flying into Memphis, Tennessee all the time. And now it's, if it wasn't for I-40 getting broken, the bridge there, we don't even think about it. We just assume that it's true. And the example I always like to use is that, you know, back in the 1920s, there was actually a huge number of magazines that were devoted just to radio, because radio was like the thing for techie people. Then it was computers during my time in the, say, 70s through late 90s. And now it's space. But all these, they come and they go. You know, once upon a time, I wrote, for example, all these stories about SCO and their continuing fight with Linux. And God help me, I'm still writing about SCO because they actually have something of a weird little comeback thing they're trying to sue IBM once again. But today, who cares about the SCO story for the most part? I mean, I cover it simply because I'm a completist, and it is just sort of weird and interesting that they're back again. But if you specialize, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, if you specialize too much and you think that is, you're going to ride that one specialty, whatever it is, for forever and a day, it won't work in the long run. To pick another example of something, I'm do a lot of coverage these days about cloud native technologies and Kubernetes in particular, all of which is good because right now, I mean, it's not like Joe or Jane user care about Kubernetes or even knows what it is, but there is a sizable technical audience out there who are still getting their minds wrapped around Kubernetes and network fabrics and so on. So I can, once again, I'm an explainer to that audience. And so I'm very busy with those stories. In 5 or 10 years, I don't expect, probably 5 years, I don't expect I will be, because they will finally have gotten to the point where Kubernetes is easy enough to use that there won't be a lot of interest in someone like me telling them what's the latest and greatest in Kubernetes 1.19 or what have you.
So it seems to me that we've established that, and this is true in a lot of technical jobs, but in journalism in particular, there are all these rapidly changing elements to it. I don't want to call them fads. I don't think they're necessarily fads.
Oh, no, they're not fads.
When it comes to topics, it's like trying to ride the wave of a topic. But also when it comes to funding models, and even when it comes to media, you've got to stay on top of what the popular what the zeitgeist of the age is. How and you've apparently done this. You've been in the journalism world for so long. How do you do that? What's the secret, if there is one, to reading the tea leaves and being able to stay just in front of that enough to just stay on top of the waves?
I think I'm lucky again because I have a gift. I have a lot of gifts that have been turned out to be the perfect gifts I needed for the career that I've ended up in. And one of those gifts is I learn very quickly. I did back in the day because like the code that I was reading back in that example I gave at Goddard, it was a combination of I have an IBM JCL framework and IBM 360 assembler was, inset. And I was able to pick that code up quickly. And by the way, kids, if you want to be a programmer, do not make assembler your first language. It is not the way to go. Do Rust, do Go. You'll do fine with those. And I am just very lucky that I have a gift that way. I also am very well aware that technology does come in waves. Excuse me as I kill the phone, literally. And so I know that, like, right, just now I said that I'm covering Kubernetes right now, and I will be for a few more years, but I'll be, talk to me in 2026, and I'll be covering something else. Don't ask me what right now, because I don't know. But part of it also is I read enormously, and I keep a close eye on what's going on out there. I read a lot of mailing lists and so on to keep an eye on what the movers and shakers are doing out there. Like you can't really read the Linux kernel mailing list. There's just too much stuff. But you can certainly look for what the big names are talking about. So if something's bugging Greg Crowett-Hartman, chances are that's something you should pay attention to in the Linux universe. I read a lot, I research a lot. I do this sort of constantly in the stream of my day. And so I'm able to spot stuff earlier than some people do. My favorite example of that actually is the web. Because I was reading this technical stuff that was coming out of CERN in Switzerland about this worldwide web thing that they were working on, I thought, well, this is interesting. And so I ended up writing the first popular article about the web back in 90. Let's see, we wrote it in 92, published in 93. I'm always sort of amused at myself, though, because even though I wrote the first popular article about the web, I was much more interested in the time in something called WAIS, World Access Information Service System. Gosh, I think I have the acronym wrong. Anyway, it was essentially the first search engine. And I thought, this is actually more interesting because I knew the web was going to be big, but I didn't see in what way it was going to be big at the time. But I thought, wow, the ability to search anywhere on the internet, mind you, the internet then was files that you got to through FTP or Archie, and information that you got to through Gopher and Veronica. But still, I thought, this is going to be big stuff someday, so I should start writing about it. And I did. But if I were to say, I still write about networking technology, but there was a time I was very successful in making a living about writing about all the stuff on the web. And because it was brand new to everyone, I wrote, God knows how many times I explained to people how to use Trumpet WinSocket to get your Windows machine to talk to all those, at the time, Unix servers, not Linux yet, to get information out of them.
That's a lot of interesting stuff all at once. You mentioned something that really caught my attention earlier, and that was the idea that where you grew up is something like 1% has like a 1% broadband access. Mm-hmm. And we've also talked about SpaceX. I assume then that you're following the Starlink beta pretty closely.
Oh yes, like paint. I think.
Let me brag just a little bit. I've got a Starlink dish right out there in the backyard, and I'm pretty sure that we're actually going over Starlink for this. So if you hear me drop out from time to time, that's why. It is a game changer. So cool. And I'm curious what you think about that as far as your ability to work from anywhere, because once Starlink goes mobile, you can literally get excellent internet access from anywhere. And I'm also wondering whether Starlink and technologies like it are going to be another sea change, like some of the other things we've seen in technology over the last 40 years.
It's definitely going to be a sea change. I'm very excited about Starlink. Growing up where I did, literally off a dirt road with an outhouse. And I didn't go to a one-room school, though. It was a two-room school, by gosh, 2 rooms. And there were 2 other kids in my class. So there were 3 of us all together. And to this very day, though, back there, there's no broadband. There's essentially no broadband. There's some very low-speed DSL, and that's it. And they're never going to drop fiber optic there. It's too expensive. They're not going to do it. The main ISPs in the United States and in most other countries, it's not just the States, aren't interested in the rural areas because they can't make any money off it. They would much rather drop gigabit fiber to me in Asheville, which is, again, it's in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Appalachia, but it's a very different kind of place. It's a town where you get a huge number of tourists and a huge number of people who are moneyed people who retire here. And anymore, we're getting a huge number of Zoomers coming in, people who are sick of the Silicon Valley or New York, and they decide to come here. Anyway, that's sort of off the point. Starlink, and if there are any other low Earth orbit ISPs, and there are some efforts out there, but I don't think they're going to get anywhere because I think Starlink is going to just own the market. It will make an enormous difference for everyone who's out there who's in a rural area that can't get it. It will enable, if you really want to go back to your little hometown in, I don't know, Wyoming, or if you really want to live and say in the north end of Vancouver Island, with Starlink, you'll be able to do it because you will be able to get high quality, fast internet wherever you choose to live. And that's a very different model. I think over the last year, we've seen that people don't have to work in some centralized office to get work done. That myth has been exploded. I mean, I know there's a lot of particularly older business executives who really think that everyone's going to go back into the corporate office. And we now know, though, we don't have to do that. I know a lot of people are refusing to go back to their the office tower of the office park. And Starlink is just going to be another major part in what I think is going to be a revolutionary change in how we work and how we live. And in particular, for those people who are now out in the country and for whatever reason can't or don't want to go to a major metropolitan area, this is going to truly empower them. There's still some economies of scale that I would look at when I think about Starlink. I'm not sure just how much bandwidth they can actually handle. I know they're working on the laser point mesh network with the satellites. That may solve a lot of it, but I would like to know a lot more about the technical side. And if you happen to be listening to this, Elon, one, I want a dish like he's got, okay? Is that understood? I'm on the list. I want it. I really do. And two, I really need to talk to your engineers.
So you could be Jonathan compliant. I like that. I have some other questions, but I want to tell you first that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Technology Powers X, an original podcast by Dell Technologies. Each episode of Technology Powers X focuses on a different industry and goes behind the scenes to help you understand how technology is reshaping business everywhere. And a recent episode, for example, features researchers who are studying the architecture of the human brain in an effort to develop more versatile AI models. Another explores the world of professional esports, featuring a behind-the-scenes look at Team Liquid and their star CSGO player, Alige. And one episode talks all about vertical farming and how innovative new tech can change where our food comes from and how this may be the future of sustainably feeding 21st century populations. Technology Powers X is hosted by Danielle Applestone, a hardware engineer and entrepreneur. If you're a pet lover, check out episode 14, The Best Partner for Pets. Here's a clip.
Yet today, technology plays a growing role, not just in happy reunions, but as an invaluable tool to America's animal welfare workers.
So search for Technology Powers X wherever you listen to podcasts and download each episode today. That's Technology Powers X. Download it today. My thanks to Technology Powers X for their support. So I want to go a little bit farther on this space thing because I'm a space geek too. I've got a telescope over there. I love looking up there, looking at the new satellites, whatever they are, and hats off to Elon and crew at SpaceX for doing their best to make the Starlink satellites a little less obvious from the ground and being a little bit merciful to the astronomers of the world, which don't like it on the whole, but there it is. When we were young, the space race was a big thing, and getting a man on the moon was almost inconceivable when we were young, and then it was done. But narrative-wise, you're talking about narratives earlier. Narratives are always characters moving with problems, moving forward towards some kind of resolution. And it's kind of like, well, we won. We got to the moon. That's over. And space is, and you pointed it out, when we have 2 or 3 flights a day going up there, it's not that big a deal anymore. And it's not, the narrative changes. And so, and of course, there's this Mars thing. Elon wants to get to Mars. There's we have Linux on Mars now, which is a cool thing. That's in the drone that they launched there, which is incredibly cool to make that thing work in 1% of the atmosphere that we have here. But that's interesting mostly to geeks, whereas the space race back in the decade was interesting to everybody. And I'm wondering what you see the narrative or multiple narratives of space in the future. And I'm also wondering if you stayed in touch with your co-workers at Goddard and sort of kept up with what's happening inside that world.
I'm still in touch with some of my old friends at Goddard, but not as much as I would like to be. We sort of took different life paths and so on. I still know a fair number of scientists at Goddard Space Flight Center, which is where I spent most of my time. They're excited about it all too, as am I. But I think, we're certainly not as interested as we were back in the 50s and 60s. But there's an amazingly large number of people who are really excited about space now. And I think that a large part of that is that it's private entrepreneurship now. NASA was and still is very bureaucratic. It's also been chronically underfunded forever. One of the reasons, I'm not sure if it made it into the broadcast, but I talked about how, one of the slower than 300 bits per second modems was 110 bit per second telex. The reason why I worked with 110 bit per second telex is I was in charge of an online system that kept track of all communication lines that were hooking up into the shuttle manned flight missions. And my job was to make sure that all the data on all these circuits that might be used to communicate with the shuttle, that all those circuits were green, they were all workable. And if they weren't green, what were their conditions? Could we not use that circuit at all? And one of those lines, even when I worked there in the 80s, was a telex line from the Bermuda tracking station to, I think it was Wallops is where it came to shore. And so even in the 80s, we were stuck using this really old technology at the time. It was only a temporary backup, but still, we actually used that line on a couple of occasions because we had nothing else that could work. And now, though, we've got really cool technology. It's changing quickly. I can still remember the first time I saw a Falcon 9 land, and it's straight out of George Powell's science fiction. Watching that land, and it is still just amazing to watch that thing land vertically. And then Starship just this last week, which is huge. The thing is constructed out of stainless steel. It is not light. It is not easy to maneuver. And they landed it as well vertically. And that is just, this is also a generation that, thanks to Star Wars back in 1977, the younger people, I say younger people, but people in their 30s and 40s have grown up with the science fiction idea of space travel and journey. And now we're looking at science fiction in real life. I still don't really believe what I'm seeing when I see the Starship land or Falcon 9's land. It's just remarkable. And I think it's that pull to that part of us that loves the idea that the science fiction future from Star Trek and Star Wars and so on, it's within our grasp. Okay, so we're really a long way from warp drives and so on. We're not going to get there in our lifetimes. But you know what? We just might make it to Mars and actually have people on Mars in our lifetime. And back when when all we could rely on was NASA, which wasn't getting the funding it needed really to do much of anything. Now it's like we might actually see it. This could actually happen. And I think that is really appealing to people, and not just people like me who are older, who grew up with the 60s space race. And I think that's just so cool.
Do we have time? I'll ask real quickly. There was a little note in the rundown that we were supposed to ask you about the Linux Berkeley packet filter, which is a little tiny, you could call it a virtual machine. I think of it as a programmable widget that lives inside of the Linux kernel. Maybe coming to Windows? What's up with that?
Well, we're really shifting gears here from like big fantasy stuff to really geeky stuff. You don't get much more geeky than that. The good old actually, you know what? Back at Berkeley packet filter actually is old. It was first created back in 92, I think. And then it was extended about 10 years ago. And yeah, it lets you run user space programs inside the Linux kernel in a very safe, confined sandbox way. And it is, again, you've got to be seriously into Linux to even know about this, much less care about it. But if you are, this is so cool because it lets you work easily at a really low level. I say easily, well, easily for serious developers. On the other hand, though, it's a lot easier than becoming a Linux kernel expert to run a program in eBPF. And it's being used now in security programs, and it's being used in networking programs. Again, that sort of giveaway with the word packet in the name. And we're discovering all kinds of developers in the Linux world have discovered all kinds of interesting things to do with it. People in the cloud native and Kubernetes world have discovered this too. And over in the Windows side of things, they're kind of jealous. And they said, this is a really useful tool. I wonder if we can actually somehow integrate this into Windows 10 and Windows Server 2016 and newer. And the answer is, actually, there are ways to do it. There are enough libraries and sort of shims that you can sort of sew eBPF into Windows. They're not there yet, but there are enough tools there that they can do it. And so you're going to be looking at some really fast, interesting ways of doing network analysis and system analysis and security programming in a comparatively easy way at a much deeper level than people are normally capable of doing. And it's already making a big change in Linux, and it's going to make a big change in Windows and interoperability between those two platforms. And if you had told me that this would have happened a year ago, I would have said, you got to be crazy. It can't do it. But, I've looked at some of the libraries out there, and, there's enough there to make this doable. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the first beta looks when it comes out.
So I hate to say that we are actually out of time, but I just we have some questions we always ask at the end, and the two main ones I'll just give you real quickly is what is your favorite text editor and scripting language? So we can finish with those.
Well, DI, of course. There is but one true. Emacs, please.
There's only one.
You know where I am on that side of the religious war.
Yeah.
As for scripting language, I actually am I've used Perl and Python, but I'm a sort of a Bash purist. And I've done some, back in the day, I used to do some pretty amazing things with awk and sed. And I know awk's syntax is off from everything else, and I don't care. I was able to make it work, and I still am. I like to say I can read a lot of different languages. I can't really program anymore in anything except actually, with Bash and the Linux internal programs, I can still actually get some working code out without killing myself.
Well, that's great. Stephen, it's been fantastic having you on the show. I wanted to have you on since I came on the show a year ago, and I'm glad we finally got it done. And we will have to have you back because the world will change, and you're telling us about it. So I do appreciate it very much. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks. So Jonathan, that was a whirlwind show we just had.
Oh, yes. Well, we got started just a couple of minutes late and kind of hustled trying to get through everything.
Yeah.
Well, but, sometimes as I said at the start, I've been reading Steven's stuff for a long time. And sometimes when you meet people that you followed, it's kind of a letdown of an experience. Not the case here. Steven's a real cool guy. Real personable, good to talk to, and I find it interesting that he is still seems like on top of his game as far as watching the different things that are going on in the world, the different technologies, and trying, like we talked about, he's still riding the wave. So yeah, I imagine we'll be reading his stuff for another 20 years if he cares to write for that long.
Sometimes when we have a guest, there's not a knock on any of it, but you think toward the end of the show, it's like, wow, we stretched that into an hour. Here we have so many hours that we could go into. It goes on and on. The space one is especially interesting to me, and I'm glad we got to dig as deeply into that. And that his background is so deep in it because Vandenberg Air Force Base is a few dozen miles that way from us. For the video people, I'm pointing west, but we actually can see. When they launch there, we see it, and I got to see them launch some of the Starlink satellites from there, and the booster rocket turns around and comes back to Earth, and you could see that with binoculars or a really good camcorder. And we didn't see it actually land on the ocean, but it landed on something that's small, like a half of a basketball court. On its butt, it lands, and it gets reused again. It's an amazing, vertically again, as Stephen was saying. So that was fantastic. I'm glad we got to go into that. So give us your plugs, and then we got to get out of here because we have to clear the studio have to do post-production and all. So
yes. Sure. I'll plug two things. First off, my normal hackaday.com. I'll write some articles over there. I'm working on an article right now about Starlink, of all things, kind of a review of what I've done with it. I've figured out some hacky, geeky little tricks with IPv6 and IPv4. And then my security article that goes live every Friday morning. And then the other thing I'll mention is the Club TWiT Discord. We are actually doing a trial run of a Linux show, and that happens every Saturday at 5 p.m. Central. And so if you're not part of Club TWiT, go join it. It's only $7 a month, and join us for the Linux show. And then we also bundle it up, and it goes out on the Club TWiT or the TWiT Plus RSS feed. So check that out and let us know what you think.
That is a great plug too for part of our expanding repertoire here at TWiT. And thanks so much, everybody, for being with us. Next week, we have Dale Dougherty on. Dale is the father, in many ways, of the Make movement. Had Make Magazine, Maker Faire, all that stuff. Great guy. So that's scheduled next week, and we will see you then. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, if you like tech news, but you also like hearing about it from the people who are actually writing the stories, well, I've got a show for you. It's called Tech News Weekly, and it's me, Jason Howell, along with my co-host, Micah Sargent. Every week, we invite the people making and breaking the biggest tech news stories from around the web onto this show to talk to us about it. It's a lot of fun. You should check it out. Tech News Weekly can be found at twit.tv/TNW every Thursday. We'll see you there.